I'm with the Houston Education Research Consortium. My name is Erin Baumgartner. I'm the Associate Director for HISD Research and Relations. And what that means is I oversee all of our research as it relates to the Houston Independent School District. That's what HISD is. And so a little bit about us, the Houston Education Research Consortium, also known as HERC, you might have heard that acronym at other things. We're housed at Rice University, and we're part of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research, and we're what's considered a research practice partnership. Now what that means is we as researchers work in partnership with practitioners to make sure that we're asking questions that they care about the answers to. Because so often in academic research, we're doing research for other academics. We publish in journals, and those are the only people that are reading what we write. And so we want to make sure that we're doing research that's informed by need and our external knowledge that is going on in other research in the field, but that we're communicating it to practitioners in a way that they can use it to make decisions and drive their practices. And so when we started, our only partner was the Houston Independent School District. And since this spring, now we're up to 11, there they go. We're up to 11 partner districts that are across the region and really covering much of the Houston area. So for reference, when we think about the total enrollment of all of these partners is a little over 707,000 students. When we think about Harris County in general, that's around 893,000 students. So through our partners, we're able to touch just such a great number of students in our region. As the person who's sort of kicking off our conversation today, I think it's important to start with a conversation about why pre-K is important and what pre-K is. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with pre-K and how that fits in the early education landscape, the way I tend to think about pre-K is it's more generally part of the public education system, whereas programs like daycare centers and child cares and preschools might be part of the private sector. And so that's how I tend to think about pre-K a little differently from other forms of early education. Now, there are a lot of reasons why pre-K is important. The first is that it's a setting where young children are developing the skills that they need to be successful in classrooms later on. And so this isn't only about learning their alphabet and knowing how to count to 10, but it's learning the social and emotional skills that they're going to need to be successful. And so that's knowing how to sit still and follow directions and understand other students. And if you've had a 4-year-old or you've been around 4-year-olds, you might understand that these skills are really important to learn early on. So as a result of developing these academic skills, we know that students who participate in pre-K tend to have more positive outcomes later on. And so a wide body of research shows us that students who attend pre-K are more likely to be school ready than their peers who don't attend. And what that means is at kindergarten entry, which is the start of formal schooling for most students, students who have attended pre-K have a leg up. And this isn't only at school entry, but this is longer term outcomes too. So students who attend high quality early education experiences are less likely to be retained in later grades, and they have better academic performance from test scores to years of total education. And so as I mentioned, these early years can have important later implications. And so when we think of an example of that, and we think of the achievement gap that exists between Black and white students at the end of high school, we can trace half of that gap back to the gap that already exists at kindergarten entry. And so the early years are so important in helping close those gaps and which will help close gaps later on. And so for much of these reasons, this is why my work has particularly focused on these early years of children's education. One of the things you might have heard me say was high quality pre-K. And so what does high quality mean? And so I'm going to share with you a few examples of ways we can think about quality as it relates to pre-K. So there's an organization at Rutgers, which is called the National Institute for Early Education Research, and they have come up with a set of benchmarks, of 10 benchmarks, which they suggest that state policies should put into place as minimum requirements for a high quality program. And they're up here on the screen, and I think you'll have them in slides that you can see later, so I'm not going to go into all of them, but there are a few that I want to point out because I think that they're particularly important. One of them is that the lead teacher in a classroom, in a pre-K classroom, should have at least a bachelor's degree. and not only have at least a bachelor's degree or above, but have specialized training in pre-K and in early childhood. So it's great if we have highly educated teachers that are leading classrooms, but if they're not trained in child development and age-appropriate skills, that's not providing a service to students. In addition to the lead teachers having training, it's also important that assistant teachers or teaching assistants in classrooms have training too. And so the NEAR recommends that an assistant teacher has at least a child development associate's degree or something equivalent if they're going to be in these classrooms providing support to teachers. And then finally, the other two things that I'll point out, because these are all things that are tangible and we can really see, is thinking about class size. So they recommend that the maximum class size for a pre-K classroom is 20 students or fewer, and that the staff to teacher ratio is 1 to 10 or better. And so while these are all great goals, it doesn't always come that way in practice, right? So somebody else can probably speak to this better than me, but Texas state policy might be, the goal might be 22 students, but what we really see is more like 24 students in a classroom. And that's not even about the student to staff ratio, because not a lot of those classrooms even have assistants that are providing support to teachers. For a little bit of context, the way public pre-K works in Texas, and that's as of right now, somebody's probably going to talk in a minute about how this is going to be changing in upcoming years, is that the state policy requires that if a district has at least 15 4-year-olds who are in one of these at-risk groups, that they have to provide at least half-day pre-K to those students. And so those are economically disadvantaged students, students who can't understand or speak English, students who have a parent in the military, are homeless or wherever in foster care. And then if space is available, families can opt into paying for pre-K in a district. And then the third group that can participate are 3-year-olds. So 3-year-olds who meet these requirements, if there's space available, they can also participate in the public pre-K program in Texas. One of the things to keep in mind is it's a little bit different in HISD in particular. So HISD has decided that full day pre-K is so important that they top up pre-K. So the state provides funding for the half day, and HISD figures out a way to fund the second half of pre-K, and for a number of years they've been offering full day pre-K to students. As I mentioned, a lot of our work is in partnership with the area school districts, and so what happened a few years ago is HISD came to us and said, we know that, or we think our students who are participating in pre-K are doing better when they hit kindergarten, but we don't know for sure. Can you help us understand that? And we also don't know whether our students who are participating in more years of pre-K are doing better than students who only participate in 1 year. So kids who are in for at 3 and 4 years old are doing better than students who are only in at 4 years old. And so in partnership with the district, we came up with a research project. And so these are the results. And this is just, again, an example of a way to think of how important pre-K is and what we see locally. So in Houston, we see that students who participate in at least 1 year of pre-K, so the bars on the two left or two right bars, 1 or 2 years, are almost twice as likely to be ready at kindergarten entry than students who participate in 0 years. So we see that there's a slight benefit to being in for 2 years versus 1 year, so enrolling at 3 years old and 4 years old versus 4 years old. But what we really see is the big bonus is for being enrolled in at least 1 year versus none. And really this difference is probably an underestimate, because what we see for these students who are in 0 years of HISD pre-K, they could have been somewhere else instead in that year. They could have been in a preschool program, they could have been in some other district in a program, but so these students could have been somewhere else. So when we really think about the students who participated in nothing versus one, we would probably see an even bigger gap here. Oh, I will say one more thing. So the one message we wanted to really share with the district from this, the takeaway that we want, and this is for you and for everyone that we share this with, is that let's figure out how to get more students into at least 1 year of pre-K. What are the ways to do that? And I think Ellie will talk a little bit more about that in a second, because there are great organizations in town that are working to do that. But we're also working on some additional research projects with the district to think about how they can improve resources available to students, and thinking about how space and place and what opportunities are available matters.